Welcome to the NAIFA webinar, Pursuing Diverse Markets, Breaking Down Barriers and Building Bridges. This is Brendan Burnett, Director of Professional Development and Education Programs. With me today is Brian Hughes. Brian is a financial advisor at Northwestern Mutual, the Aventura Group. He is involved with wealth preservation, accumulation, and distribution. And he has won numerous corporate and national awards and honors for his production and achievement and service to his community, including community awards. And today, Brian is going to be explaining how to bridge the gap between your practice and niche markets. He will also discuss why diversity in your practice is essential to survival as a financial planner, insurance advisor. And he will also discuss how to overcome the barriers of niche diverse markets. This webinar is being recorded, and you may type questions in the question box on the right side of your screen. All questions will be answered during a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Brian, welcome to the webinar.
Well, thank you so much, and it's a privilege for me to be here to speak with all of the NAIFA members about this very important topic. What we're going to do is we're going to spend the next hour or so and we're going to discuss how you and your own personal practice, whether you're an insurance advisor, you're an investment advisor, or you do both, how you can pursue diverse markets and you can break down the barriers and build the bridges. A little bit about myself so that you can kind of understand from the angle that I'll be coming from is I'm originally from the Washington, D.C. area. I actually went to school and studied marketing at Howard University in Washington, D.C. And then I started my career at Goldman Sachs in New York City. And I was a financial analyst in their private wealth management division. After 10 months of starting at Goldman Sachs in New York, I was asked to relocate down here to Miami, where I finished my career at Goldman Sachs after about 4 or 5 years at the firm. And then I started my practice at Northwestern Mutual, and I've been here at Northwestern Mutual for about 6 years. Now, going from private wealth management and just managing assets of ultra high net worth individuals to going to a firm that focuses not on just on wealth management, but also insurance products was a huge transition for me. So I had to learn the market in which that I was in when it came to financial planning with Northwestern Mutual, but also how me being from the Northeast, how I can break into some of the diverse markets that we find, especially in the South Florida area. So when we discuss why diversity is important, there's a couple of things that we should consider. And everyone that's on the webinar today, you can think about how this may apply to you personally in your practice and in the community in which you serve. So of course, our communities are becoming more and more diverse. You have gentrification in a lot of communities. I'm from the Washington, D.C. area, so we see that going on in D.C. We actually see that going on here in South Florida as well. And you may notice that in your communities too. We're finding that more and more diverse people are moving in to our communities. Our industry is becoming more diverse. An industry of financial planning and investments, which was historically drawn and driven by male dominance, we're starting to find a lot more women who are becoming successful and starting their own practices, owning their own practices, and being very successful in this career. And not everyone has the same needs. And so you may be working with a college student who just graduated and they're starting their new job, or you may be working with somebody who inherited a large sum of money, or you may just be working with a family that works hard and they just need some basic insurance needs. So understanding all of these different diverse people will help us to serve them in a very important way. What we also find is that diversity is also important because natural markets may not be sustainable. And maybe you're new in the business and you have a natural market, but it's not necessarily conducive to the type of work that we do. Sometimes that happens. So one of the things that's going to be very important, whether you're new in the business or maybe you're already established in the business, is being able to find other ways in which that we can break into these niche diverse markets, because even our own natural markets may eventually dry up. So how would you define diversity? Diversity seems to be a key word in a lot of organizations these days. A lot of companies have diversity and inclusion efforts, and a lot of people love to be in diverse communities. So how would you define it? Well, here are a couple of examples of how diversity is defined by different sources. Google says that showing a great deal of variety or something that's very different. Webster says it is differing from one another. Another one from Webster is composed of distinct or unlike elements or qualities. And for all of the investment advisors out there, I even took a definition from Investopedia when it comes to diversity that they had from NASDAQ. And it says investing in different asset classes and in securities of many issuers in an attempt to reduce overall investment risk to avoid damaging a portfolio's performance by the poor performance of a single security, industry, or country. Now that's interesting because as investment advisors, we may understand that concept. We spend a lot of time talking to our clients about diversified portfolios, how important asset allocation is. And so if we take this same principle, and although this is not an investment discussion, but if we take that same principle of why even we would suggest to our clients of how important diversity is in their mutual fund choice or asset class choice and the percentage of what we would invest in, can we not also apply that in our practice? And we're going to talk about ways in which that we can do that. So when we think about how our practice favors, now for illustration purposes, here are two portfolios that a client may have. Now, we're just using this for illustrative purposes. Sometimes a client may have all stocks. Now, even within their equity portfolio, they may have different types of assets, foreign developed, S&P 500 emerging markets, but that's a portfolio that we know that is extremely aggressive. Or we may find somebody who's just holding cash, right? They're only holding cash, and so it's very conservative. It may not even keep up with the rate of inflation, depending on what year we're talking about. But are we the type of advisor that we have only one type of profession that we work with? Are we the type of advisor that we only work with people of a certain nationality or a certain profession or a certain group? How can we diversify our portfolios, our client portfolios that is, and have a portfolio that may look something like this? A diversified portfolio is something that is going to assist us as advisors to remain in business when times get rough. And I think that we all as advisors can agree that if all of our clients, whether they were investment clients or they were insurance clients, if all of our clients were real estate professionals in 2009 and 2010, we may have had a hard time in our practice in those years. There were a lot of people in the real estate industry who suffered because of all of the things that were going on in that space. But those of us who had diversified client, we were able to not only help some of those real estate professionals, but also be able to take advantage of other professions who may have been doing well during those troubled times. And is that not what a diversified portfolio does for our clients? And if you look back at even some of the portfolios, if you're an investment advisor, some of those portfolios that you may have managed back in those times, you'll find that there were certain parts of those portfolios that saved those portfolios when other asset classes were underperforming. So the goal is as an advisor, how can we show how a diversified client base will help us in times of need? So we have to ask ourselves, though, if diversity is the key, or is diversity one of the solutions to help us to not only stay in the business, but also grow our business, what type of diversity are we talking about? So there's different types of diversity. It could be industry or profession, whether it's athletes or it's physicians or people who work in the medical field, or it could be architects, it could be engineers, or it could be business owners, it could be restaurant owners. Those are all different diverse groups of people who have different needs. For example, if you work in the restaurant industry, you know that business owners who own restaurants have different needs because one of the biggest challenges they have are the turnover of workers. Sometimes it's the wait staff, it's the bartenders, it's the hostess and hosts. They have certain needs. But then you may have another group of medical professionals who have certain needs as well when it comes to hiring and maintaining a great staff of nurses, nurse practitioners, front office and back office staff. They all have different needs. So whether you're an investment advisor or you're an insurance professional or both, there are certain needs that these industries and these professions are going to need. I oftentimes joke with some of the advisors in my office and some of the other professionals that I know, and sometimes they'll have a whole slew of funeral directors that they work with, and they say, Brian, yeah, funeral directors, they're never going out of business, because it's just one of those things that despite what's going on in the world and what's going on in the market, their business is always going. Race, nationality, and language. I'll kind of tell you a little bit of story for me myself. I studied Russian in high school. So throughout high school and some parts of college, I took Russian as a language course, but then also some Russian classes when it came to literary subjects as well. Now, with me being in South Florida, although I am an African-American advisor, I sit on a board of a Russian networking organization down here that is designed to promote Russian-owned businesses or businesses that have Russian-speaking individuals as employees. Now, South Florida is a very diverse part of the country as it is. South Florida is known to have a very high Russian population in the Sunny Isles and Hallandale area. But South Florida is also known to have a very large Cuban community as well. And you may not know it, but also South Florida has a very large Jewish community here as well. So me, as an African-American advisor, when I look at what South Florida is known for, mostly tourism, is known for Cuban food. It's also now becoming known as Little Russia. In order for me to survive down here in this diverse community, I had to go back and start thinking of ways that I can be connected to these communities that are here. So I took Russian in high school. And when I learned that there was a Russian community down here, I started going to the Russian American Chamber events. So the Russian community is large enough that they have their own Chamber of Commerce. They also have a lot of areas here in South Florida where you can find Russian restaurants, you can find Russian grocery stores, Russian doctors, pediatricians. The community has become so large. There are Russians who live here in South Florida, and they don't have to speak English at all. So a way in which that I was able to break into this community is that I tapped into something that I had in high school, which was learning the Russian language and becoming familiar with the Russian community. Also with the Jewish community here in South Florida. When I was in high school also in Washington, D.C., my parents, I'm so thankful for them, but they got me involved in the program at the United States Holocaust Museum in D.C. So as a teenager in high school, if we went on the field trip that our school had to go to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., then the Holocaust Museum would also allow us to apply for one of their internships in one of their programs called Bringing Home the Lessons. So I was privileged enough to not only go on that field trip, apply to the internship, and I was accepted. And for the last 14 years, I've been an ambassador for the Holocaust Museum and their Bringing Home the Lessons program in Washington, D.C. Having that history and doing that work, and then also subsequently traveling to Israel, I've been able to connect with a lot of the Jewish community down here in South Florida. So although I am a young African-American advisor, I do wealth management and I do insurance, I have been able to break into two communities that are historically known to be very close and shut because I have something that connects me to them. And I'm going to show you a way in which that we can break down the barrier of maybe possibly feeling uncomfortable when it comes to being around diverse communities or areas like that, and how we can use some of the things that we may already have in our arsenal to start building those bridges, even though there may be some barriers that exist. So what will we discuss in the time that we have allotted for today? We're going to discuss what barriers exist, and also we're going to discuss the bridges. The barriers. Sometimes it could be our own attitude or mindset. And oftentimes what I like to do is I like to talk about my own personal experience. And as we're going through this presentation, if you're taking notes, you may think about some of the challenges that you have faced, maybe personally or professionally, that can be a barrier. But then what we're going to do is we're going to discuss how you can break down those barriers and really focus on those bridges. So when I think about sometimes the barrier to diverse markets and pursuing them, could be our own mindset and attitude. And I like to give the example of when I was at Goldman Sachs and I was offered a promotion. As many of all of us know and remember the times that we went through as advisors back in 2007 to 2009, there were a lot of people who did not own their own business that were being laid off from their jobs. And at that time, I was still fairly young, in my early 20s, and I was coming towards the end of my analyst program at Goldman Sachs, and I was offered a promotion. Now, here are the details. You would think that, yes, at a time like this, when everybody is pretty much on pins and needles as to whether or not they're going to get laid off, for Goldman Sachs to offer you a promotion, you had to have been excited. But in my mind, I was scared and nervous. And here's the reason why. I was in Miami, but the opportunity that they gave me is that they wanted me to become not an analyst anymore, but they actually wanted to promote me and be a producer. The caveat is that they wanted me to be a producer in West Palm Beach, Florida. Now, if any of you have ever been to South Florida, if you're here in South Florida, West Palm Beach, Fort Lauderdale, and Miami, although considered South Florida, are three very different cities. It seems as if the further south you go, you feel like you're more in the north. And the further north you go in Florida, you really do feel like you're in the south. So here was my mindset, here was my attitude, and this is how it worked to my own detriment. Is that at that time, you may remember that there was a man by the name of Murdoch. And he was in West Palm Beach, and he basically took a lot of people's money in a Ponzi scheme. And so in my mind, I'm saying to myself, here I am, a young African-American male. I don't have an MBA because, see, in wealth management, especially when you're dealing with the ultra high net worth, you got a lot of Harvard Business School grads, you have a lot of Wharton grads and Ivy League grads, and I just have a bachelor's degree from an historically black school. So you want me to move to West Palm Beach, which is very, very different from South Florida, and you want me to try to start bringing in accounts of a minimum of $10 million. And although I was excited, I said, there's no way I'm going to be able to do this. So my own attitude and mindset, even though this was a diverse market, it was a market that I am not from, nor is a natural market for me. I was unwilling to accept that promotion because of my own attitude and mindset. And now where I am in my practice, a lot of the clients that I have are in West Palm Beach because I was able to change my attitude and break down those barriers. Being comfortable. As you can probably imagine, you can probably hear it in my voice, I was very uncomfortable when I was presented with that opportunity. But it also reminds me of what I call the cafeteria study. If you think back when you were in school, if you have children you're in school, who are in school, you may remember this. It's always the first day of school, whether it's in college, high school, or middle school. and it's time for lunch. And you grab your lunch in the cafeteria or the food court, and you don't know anybody there, and you're wondering where you're going to sit. And oftentimes, we will sit with people who we feel that we have the most in common with. And so what I found is that when I was in high school and when I was in middle school, I would often try to sit at a table with people who did not look like me. Because it was too comfortable to sit with the other kids who looked like me and possibly lived in the same neighborhood. And what that enabled me to do is it forced me to make friends and associates with people who may be from a different ethnic background or different nationality or different language, but it gave me an opportunity to learn something about a different culture other than mine, which can sometimes make us feel uncomfortable. And rightly said, because if we look at the world today, if you look at the news and you look at the media, it seems as if we're constantly being encouraged to be divisive. So sometimes going into a diverse market can be uncomfortable, but it can still be done. And for me also, if you look at the next one, sometimes it could just be innocent ignorance. Innocent ignorance. Here's an embarrassing story that I like to share. When I left Goldman Sachs, I took a sabbatical and I did some traveling. And one of the things that I really love to do that helps me to become more comfortable with other groups and nationalities and languages and cultures is I like to travel outside the U.S. So currently I've been to 49 countries, different countries, and I'm hoping to reach my 50th next month. Now, here's a short story of what I experienced because of my own ignorance. When I left Goldman Sachs in 2009, I decided that I was going to do a round the world trip. And so what I did was I looked at these different programs, these different airlines, and they have an around the world ticket that you can purchase. And I found one that fit what I wanted to do, and I bought it. And one of my first stops was in South America. I stopped in Ecuador, and I found a family through some other mutual friends that were willing to host me, and they allowed me to stay with them for a little less than a week, about five days. And I was so thankful for the hospitality and all the things that they did. I told them, I said, you ever come to Miami, you got a place to stay, and I'll take care of you. And they told me, they said, we would love to, but we can't. I said, well, why? I said, well, because we need a visa. And I said, no, you don't. I said, I came here with just my passport. All you need is a passport. You don't need a visa to come to the United States. And they said, no, we do. And I said, no, trust me. When I came to Ecuador, they didn't ask me for a visa. I just had my passport. I didn't realize that as an American citizen, I'm privileged. There's almost any country around the world that I can travel to with my passport because I'm an American. And that other countries have the same privilege. Now, that was something that I learned. And sometimes the barrier could be is that I see this culture, there is an opportunity there, but I may not fully know enough of this culture for me to feel comfortable to try to start working with this culture. And that's very real. But again, we're going to find some ways in which that we can break down that barrier. The next barrier could be race and ethnicity, the private membership. And this is kind of a funny story. It's a real story, but it's a funny story that I like to tell. Many of you may be familiar with some private clubs and some private memberships that exist throughout the country. Sometimes it can be a country club. Sometimes it could be workspace where only the elite, or it's done by private membership, you have to apply. So there's an organization here in South Florida that's very, very popular among athletes, a lot of the Heat players, a lot of the baseball players, some celebrities, music artists. But the one thing that they do not allow are financial advisors. And I can understand that because, if I was a financial advisor and I knew that all these members were athletes and they were socialites and they had all this money, I'd be referring myself to everybody. So because of that, one of the rules of stipulation is you cannot be a financial advisor. But I learned that one of the women that I used to work with when I was at Goldman Sachs, she got a membership in. And so I'm talking to her, and we're very close. We're very good friends. And so I'm talking to her, and she's bringing up that she has this membership, and I'm saying, wait a minute. How did you get in? And she stopped and she looked at me and she said, come on, Brian, blonde hair, blue eyes. Now, I didn't take offense to it because we're close, and I know that she didn't mean any disrespect or she didn't intend to offend me in any way. But what it did was it showed me and it confirmed for me that there's some markets that I just may not be able to break into because it is what it is. But again, if you're an advisor and you've been in this business a long time, we have to find ways to overcome objections and find a way to get ourselves in the door. And so although it's reality, and knowing that, sometimes there are exceptions made for certain things that we may not agree with, but that's the world that we live in, and that's life. I can complain about it, or if I can learn the rules and be creative, then maybe there's a way I can break down this barrier and build a bridge. Now that we've spent all this time on the barriers and maybe some of the reasons that we may not go into a diverse market, let's talk about the bridge. And maybe there's some other barriers that you thought of while we were having this discussion. I'd love to hear them. But maybe here's some way that we can break down these barriers that at least I've notated here and shared my own personal experience of how I've been able to do that. The bridges. Now, you may be asking yourself, what are these fractions? Well, the reality of it is if you remember when you were in school, or maybe you have children, they're coming home and they're asking you to help them with their math homework, fractions were always the hardest thing for me to do. But there's a concept. There's a concept when doing fractions that makes it easier. And so if you take a few moments, short moments, to think about and look at these fractions, what is the first thing that we have to do in order to solve the problem? Well, you can get out a calculator or you can Google it. But if we were doing this by hand, the first thing that we would do is we would find the common denominator. And once we found the common denominator, we can add or subtract any fraction with ease. Which is why you can probably look at number 3 and easily do that one in your head because it's already there. 9 is the common denominator, so 5 plus 4 is 9, and so we know that the answer to the third one is 1. But to get the answer for 1 and 2, it's going to take some time. And what that illustrates for us is that going into diverse markets is not going to be easy. But if you find the common denominator, what is it that you have in common with this group of people so that when you make that connection, it's as easy as finding the answer to problem number 3. And we're going to show how that's possible. Here are the bridges. So I had to take a look at some of the barriers that I expressed, and then I had to say, well, what are some of the bridges that I could use to kind of break into these diverse markets? And so I had to take a look at maybe some of the interests that I have. What are some of the interests that I just enjoy? Well, I enjoy culture, art, and travel. So one of the things with me being and have traveled to 49 countries, I can almost meet anyone and like and learn where they're from, and it's I have most likely been to their country. For example, yesterday, I hosted an event for a museum, a charitable event for a museum that I do some volunteering from. And I met a gentleman randomly who came to the event, and he said, I'm from Dubai. Now, here in South Florida, there are not a lot of people here from Dubai. But when he said that he was from Dubai, I could quickly say, you know what? I've been to Dubai 3 times in the last 3 years. And his eyes got so wide, and he says, are you serious? I said, yeah. I said, I love Dubai. And at first, when I was speaking to him, he didn't really seem that interested in talking to me. But once I shared a common denominator with him, you're from Dubai, I've been to your city, and I've been to your country, it was almost as if he just wanted to talk to me about anything. And sometimes that's what it all takes, is to know that either I'm from your area, I've been to your area, and that's what brings us together. The next one is I love history. And so I was in Berlin in May, and I had to take an Uber to the airport. Now, the gentleman that was taking me, he had a very thick accent, but I knew that he wasn't from Germany. And so, just, got in the car, wasn't really trying to have much of a conversation with me. But one of the things that um, I was able to get out of him was, where is he from? And he said, well, I'm from Thessalonica. Now, I've never been to Thessalonica before, but when I heard the name, I remember that that is something that's in the Bible from the Thessalonians. So you have two books in the Bible that are written to the Thessalonians. So I mentioned to him, I said, is that where in the Bible it's to the Thessalonians? And he says, yes. How did you know? I said, well, I've read the Bible, I've studied it before, but I've never been, but I've always been interested. But once I made a common denominator with him, that he's from a country that I may have never been, but I was familiar with it enough because I love history and because I love reading the Bible. This was something that brought us together. And even to the point where by the time he dropped me off at the airport, he had shown me all of these pictures of his family. He had shown me all of these pictures of his country and areas that I should go to if I ever make it out there. Finding the common denominator. Another way that we could do it is telling a person, especially if you're looking to break into this market because you're interested in growing your practice, is giving the impression that I already have clients like you. So this is nothing new for me. So before I was in Berlin, I was in London, and I was on my way to the British Museum. Now, when I was on my way to the British Museum, again, my Uber driver, when I got the request, I got in the car, and I realized that my driver was not British. He didn't have a British accent at all. And I asked him, where is he from? And he said he was from Pakistan. Now, what was interesting is he could probably tell I was American. Now, he was very professional, but I kind of sensed that he may have just been either really focused on his business, but he wasn't really talking much. And when I got talking to him, again, I'm trying to find a common denominator because I'm trying to test out this theory. What I'm finding is he's from Pakistan. And I said, I have clients from Pakistan, and they always show me pictures from Pakistan when they go. And there's a really beautiful mountain that's really famous there. And he named the name of the mountain. I said, that's exactly it. And I showed him some pictures of the pictures that my client showed me. And he says, yes, that's where I'm from. And this guy just lightened up. I mean, we're talking, and do you know, by the end of the conversation, I had his name, his email address, and his phone number, so that if I go to Pakistan, he says I have a place to stay. Sometimes it could be a person that's from a different country that's living in your area, or it could be a community of people who have needs that we can help them with, whether it's an investment planning or whether it's an insurance planning. Sometimes it's being able to break into that network. And all it takes is just for us to find the common denominator. And I'll give you an example of why that's so important. And sometimes it's the psychology of people. One of the things that I've noticed, there's a joke that a lot of people say that I've heard, especially here in South Florida. Unfortunately, I've been here for 10 years, and it's embarrassing to me to say that I don't speak Spanish fluently. Now, if you come to South Florida and you're in Miami, it's almost as if you should eventually learn how to speak Spanish, because there are some areas of Miami where nobody speaks English. But what I found whenever I've traveled is that I am welcomed and received better if I just try to speak the local language. If you've ever traveled outside the U.S. and you've gone to France or you've gone to Spain or you've gone to Brazil, or you've gone to anywhere else that where English is not the first language, if you just attempt to speak their language, people are more likely to assist you and go out of their way because you're showing personal interest in something that belongs to them, whether it's food or culture. And that's something that can really help to share that experience with the diverse market that you're looking to break into. There's other things that, that it talks about that we share in common. So here in South Florida, with my experience at the Holocaust Museum, that's something that's a topic of conversation as well with many people that I come in contact with. That community is very tight, but I can have those conversations about the history. I've been to the concentration camps in Germany. I've been to Israel. I worked in Washington, D.C. at the museum. And being able to share those experiences and showing that community that I am also interested in things that are important to them have absolutely helped me in my practice down here in South Florida. So I come back to where it says on the slide in building the bridges, I know the guy. Sometimes you may know a person or an individual who can help you to break into that diverse market. And so I go back to the example of that private membership that I was trying to get into. I wanted more information, but my friend told me, well, she was able to get in because blonde hair, blue eyes, and I wasn't able to. What I realized is that when I did additional research is I know one of the founding partners of the organization, and I don't only know him, but I've actually worked with him personally. So sometimes, even though there could be this barrier, and it could be a barrier that you yourself cannot control, and sometimes it could be an attitude or a mentality that we have when it comes to diversity. Sometimes it could just be a way that you can break into it because you know somebody in that community, you know somebody there who will help you and be your champion and will help you to get into that market by introducing you to people in that community, allowing you to do a presentation to a group of people in that community. And that's something that I found. And once I realized that one of the founding partners and founding members of that organization was somebody that I personally knew and who knew me personally, it was a way in which I was able to break down that bridge. Break down that barrier, but to build that bridge. So when we think about barriers and bridges, I hope up until this point, it's been an eye-opener that being able to pursue diverse markets, although it could be taxing, but it could be helpful. Whether it's a nationality, it's an ethnicity, it's a language group, it's a industry or a profession of where you want to break down or where you want to break down those barriers, you can do so. And here's an example of why that's important. So when we think about going back to the investment conversation and having diversified portfolios, why we as advisors and insurance professionals, we talk to our clients about that. And sometimes even when it comes to insurance, having a diversified insurance portfolio is important because you don't want all of your risks to be at one company. Here's an example of what we find when it comes to how a diverse portfolio, even when it comes to investments, can help. So again, this is for illustrative purposes, but it kind of paints a reality for us when it comes to having a diverse market in our practice. You can look at real estate, for example, in 2001. Real estate was the top performing asset class in 2001. It did very well in 2002 and 2003. And then again, it was on top in 2004. But again, if you had all of your assets in this one asset class, you had a great wave for the first 5 years or 6 years. And then when 2007 hit, you hit rock bottom, literally. And so it goes with our personal practices. If for the first 6 years or our entire career, we've been really kind of banking on this one group of people that we do business with, there are shifts in our community. There are shifts in professions. and it can serve to actually be to our detriment. But what you'll find is that the most consistent block on this screen is the one right in the middle. It's the diversified portfolio. And having a diversified portfolio, you're never looking to be on top or to be on the bottom, but you're sustaining. And we lose a lot of advisors throughout the country because when they come in, their natural market is not strong enough to get them started on their feet, or their natural market is a good market, but it's not sustainable. But if there's a way that we can add more diversity to our practice, then we can have a better shot of sustaining. And there will be times that we'll be on top, and there'll be some times that we'll be at the bottom. But what you'll find is that we will never strike out completely if we have a diversified portfolio. So again, just for illustrative purposes, this really helps us to see it and kind of paint that picture of why diversity is important in our practice. And these are principles that can be used in your offices. So if you're a manager, or if you own a brokerage firm, or if you own a practice, and you think about the sustainability, not just in your practice and your clients, but also when it comes to your advisors that work for you, you can get access to those communities if you're recruiting to diverse markets. And that's something that we've done here in South Florida and Aventura. We're in a very highly Jewish community. And so most of our advisors reflect that, but we have a strong, diverse group of African-American advisors, both male and female, and also Jewish advisors, both male and female. And then we also even recently brought on a new female advisor from Iran. And so, you know, and that was huge for us because we're in this community and we see what's going on in the world. We see the tension that happens to certain parts of the country. But for us to bring in this advisor was huge for us because we are very interested in hiring diverse people, having a diverse office, but also serving the diverse clients that we're finding to be in this community. And it's one of the reasons why our office in the Northwestern Mutual Network is one of the most grossing, premium grossing offices in the country. And I really take my hat off to our leadership for doing that and making diversity a priority. So these principles can go, you know, further than just when it comes to your clientele. It can also assist and help with the advisors that work in your office if you're responsible for hiring. And I think that as it's helped for us and it's helped for me, it can also help some of the others. And so at this time, I'll open it up for questions, if there are any.
Thanks, Brian. And just a reminder, you can type your questions in the question box on the right side of your screen, and we'll pause for a moment for any questions that our participants might have. And our first question, Brian, how good is your Russian today as of right now?
Very good question. So I took Russian in high school for 2.5 years. And unfortunately, at that time, I didn't really appreciate the ability and opportunity I had to speak Russian. And then I took it a little bit in college. But I cannot say at all that I am fluent in Russian. I can understand some phrases. I can say some words. But I'll tell you, even though I'm not fluent, and even though I can't hold a long conversation in Russian, when I started getting involved in the Russian American Chamber, there's another organization, and you may be familiar, it's called BNI. I can't remember exactly what the acronym stands for, but basically it's a group, an organization, networking group that is designed for professionals to come in and exchange quality referrals. And each chapter can only have one person in a profession in that chapter. So I've been at Northwestern Mutual for 6 years. I've been involved in this organization for about 5 years now. And 2 years ago, this Russian networking organization, 2 years ago, they asked me to be on the board of directors. So me not speaking Russian fluently, but having Russian advisors in my office, and we had once had a Russian recruiter, Russian-speaking recruiter, I was able to join the organization. And because of my involvement and my stick-to-itiveness and just getting to know the people in the community, I am the only non-speaking Russian in the group. Yet they asked me and approached me to be on the board, and I've been on the board of directors for the last 2 years of that organization.
Outstanding. Well, we have no further questions at this time. So, Brian, I want to thank you for this outstanding presentation on breaking down barriers and the importance of diversity, and really how diversity has pursuing diversity has enriched your business and your life. So we appreciate very much those insights. And I want to also thank our participants for participating on the NAIFA webinar today. This concludes the webinar.